When I first moved into the small two-bedroom apartment, I never imagined how quickly the walls of strangers could become the comfort of home. My roommate, Daniel, greeted me with the easy smile of someone who carried warmth wherever he went. His presence felt disarming, almost too kind for a city where people rarely had time for each other. He already had a partner, a long-term boyfriend named Aaron, and so I never entertained the thought that anything between us could drift beyond friendship. The first few weeks were spent in the rhythm of ordinary life, splitting rent, arranging shelves, learning which nights were quiet and which were filled with Daniel's laughter as his friends visited. I admired the way he moved around the kitchen with confidence, how he had a habit of humming old songs while cooking, how he made even the dull routine of chores seem bearable. Soon, dinners at the small wooden table became ritual, and silence between us was never uncomfortable. It was in those silences that something began to grow, something unspoken. Daniel would lean back on the couch while we watched late-night shows, his arm casually resting on the cushion between us, close enough for me to notice the warmth, but not close enough to cross the invisible line. Sometimes, when the room fell dark, except for the flicker of the screen, I would catch his eyes on me. They would shift quickly away, replaced by a grin, as though he had been lost in thought, and didn't want me to notice. He talked about Aaron often, though rarely with the light one expects when speaking of love. The stories came with sighs, long pauses, or complaints disguised as jokes. I never pried. It wasn't my place to. Still, I couldn't ignore the way his voice softened when he said he felt unheard, or the way he lingered in my room after midnight, pouring out fragments of himself he admitted he couldn't share with Aaron. At first, I convinced myself this was simply the intimacy of friendship. People confide in those who are near, especially in the fragile hours of night. Yet, each word seemed weighted with more than trust. It felt like a thread pulling us closer. When Daniel laughed at my dry humor, when his hand brushed mine as he passed me a plate, when he waited for me after work, just so we could walk back together, I began to wonder if these were ordinary gestures at all. Still, I buried those thoughts. He was taken, and I had no intention of being the shadow that followed behind someone else's love. So I learned to quiet my heartbeat when he leaned close, to suppress the longing that surfaced when he sat across from me, hair messy, eyes tired but honest, as if the day had stripped him of every defense. The cracks in his relationship revealed themselves gradually. Phone calls that ended with slammed doors, messages left unread on the kitchen counter, evenings where he would return home with exhaustion carved deep into his face. Once, I heard him muttering angrily to himself, pacing the living room before finally sinking into the couch, shoulders trembling though no tears came. That night, he asked if I could stay up with him, no reason given. We sat there in silence until dawn painted the walls. He never explained, and I never asked, but something shifted. I began to sense that he looked to me for more than just companionship. The way he lingered at my door before wishing me good night, the way he asked about my day, as though the details mattered more than the summary, the way his laughter seemed fuller with me than with anyone else, it all carried an undertone I struggled to ignore. And yet, the uncertainty weighed heavier than the hope. Perhaps I was imagining it, misinterpreting kindness for desire. Perhaps I was only filling the gaps of my own loneliness with illusions. I told myself these things repeatedly, trying to silence the quiet thrum of anticipation every time Daniel entered the room. One evening, after another one of his tense phone calls with Aaron, Daniel sat across from me, silent, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the table. The air between us felt charged, like the pause before a confession. His lips parted as though he wanted to speak, then closed again, leaving only silence to hang heavy. I watched him wrestle with words he couldn't release. In that moment, I realized something undeniable, whether I acknowledged it or not. There was a truth simmering beneath the surface of our companionship, a truth that frightened me, because once spoken, it could never be undone. And as Daniel finally lifted his gaze to meet mine, eyes brimming with something deeper than friendship, I knew the silence we had been living in was about to break. The night it happened was unremarkable at first. Rain tapped gently against the windows, and the apartment carried the quiet hum of the city outside. Daniel had just ended another heated phone call with Aaron, his voice low but laced with frustration. When he entered the living room, his shoulders sagged as though he bore the weight of something far heavier than words. I was seated on the couch with a book in hand, though I hadn't been reading for a while. Daniel dropped beside me, letting out a sigh that seemed to empty him of all resistance. He didn't speak at first, only rubbed his face with both hands, as though trying to erase the evening from his memory. I wanted to ask if he was all right, but I had learned that Daniel opened up in his own time, and pressing him only made him retreat further. Minutes passed. Finally, he whispered, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." His voice cracked on the last word. He wasn't looking at me when he said it, but I felt the sting of his vulnerability, raw and unguarded. I set the book aside and shifted closer. "Do what?" I asked softly. He drew in a shaky breath. "Pretend. Pretend that I'm happy. Pretend that things are fine with Aaron. Pretend that what I want isn't sitting right in front of me." The words landed like a stone in water, rippling through me, pulling everything I thought I knew into question. My chest tightened, and for a moment, the room seemed impossibly small. "Daniel," I started, but my voice faltered. He turned to me then, his eyes shimmering with something I had only dared to imagine, longing, confession, and a plea all tangled together. "I can't keep it inside anymore," he said. "I think about you more than I should, more than I ever expected to." The air between us seemed to thrum with electricity. I swallowed hard, torn between the thrill of his words and the weight of what they meant. "You're with someone," I reminded him, though my voice lacked conviction. "I know," he said quickly, almost desperately, "and I've tried to stop. I've tried to push it down, to tell myself it's wrong. But when I come home and see you here, when I hear your laugh, when you listen to me without judgment, I can't help it." His hands trembled as he spoke, fingers knotting together like he was afraid of what might happen if he let go. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Inside me, two voices battled fiercely, one warning me to protect what was left of morality, the other urging me to step into the dangerous allure of what I had wanted all along. "I don't want to be the reason you hurt him," I finally said. It was the truth, though even as I spoke it, the pull toward Daniel deepened. "You're not the reason," Daniel replied, his voice steady now, as if saying the words aloud had granted him clarity. "The cracks were there long before you. You reminded me of what it feels like to be seen." His confession pierced something in me, the part that had always feared I was imagining things. All those late-night talks, the lingering glances, the silences that carried more than words, they had not been one-sided after all. I wanted to resist, to hold on to principle, but when his hand brushed against mine on the couch, I didn't move away. The simple touch felt like fire, igniting everything we had both been holding back. His fingers lingered, tentative, asking without demanding. My breath caught. "Daniel, if we do this, there's no going back," I said, though my body betrayed me by leaning ever so slightly toward him. "I don't want to go back," he murmured. The next moments unfolded in silence, a silence louder than any declaration. His lips found mine in a hesitant, trembling kiss that spoke more of fear and longing than certainty. It was tender, searching, almost apologetic, yet filled with the unspoken promise of everything we had denied ourselves. When we finally pulled apart, the room felt different, charged, fragile, dangerous. Daniel's eyes searched mine, as if waiting for rejection, or perhaps redemption. "We crossed a line," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I know," he said, his voice steady but his expression torn. "But maybe it was the line I was meant to cross." The rain outside had grown heavier, masking the storm that now raged within us. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how we would face the reality of what had just begun. All I knew was that we had broken the silence, and nothing would ever be the same again. Morning came with a heaviness that no amount of coffee could shake. The apartment was still, yet the silence carried a different weight than before. Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped tightly around a mug he hadn't touched. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, and when they met mine, I saw the question lingering there. What now? Neither of us spoke for a long while. I wanted to believe the night before had been nothing more than a dream, but the ache on my lips told me otherwise. Every second of closeness still pulsed in my memory, daring me to relive it. And yet, beneath the warmth was a sharper truth. What we had done could not exist without consequence. Daniel broke the silence first. "I can't keep pretending with Aaron," he said flatly. His voice lacked the usual tremor, but I could hear the fracture beneath his calm. Last night only proved what I'd been avoiding for months. I shifted uneasily in my chair. "Daniel, ending things with him because of me, that's not fair. You need to decide for yourself, not because of what happened." He looked at me then, a flash of hurt crossing his face. "Don't you see? It's not just because of last night. I've been gone from that relationship for a long time. You only reminded me of what I'd been missing." The sincerity in his words struck deep, but it did little to soothe the guilt gnawing inside me. "If this was meant to happen," I said carefully, "it should have begun honestly, not as a betrayal." Daniel leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "You think I don't know that? I hate myself for how it happened. But if I keep denying what I feel for you, I'll be lying twice over, once to him and once to myself." The gravity of his confession hung between us, thicker than the steam rising from our mugs. For the first time, I saw Daniel stripped of every facade. He wasn't just the cheerful roommate, the patient listener, or the man with a smile to mask his pain. He was someone standing at a crossroads, terrified, yet resolute. That evening, Daniel made the call. I stayed in my room, listening to muffled voices rise and fall, the sound of anger clashing with sorrow, until at last there was silence. When he emerged, his face was pale, his eyes swollen. He didn't speak, and I didn't press. We sat together in quiet solidarity, the weight of endings pressing heavily upon us both. Days passed, and though Aaron was no longer part of Daniel's life, the atmosphere in the apartment remained taut, fragile. We avoided rushing into anything that resembled a relationship. Instead, we circled each other carefully, navigating the new terrain of honesty. Sometimes his hand would brush mine, and sometimes his eyes would linger longer than necessary, but we both understood the need for patience. One night, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker against the horizon, Daniel spoke softly. "Do you regret it?" "What we did?" The question lingered in the air, sharp and vulnerable. I thought carefully before answering. "I regret the way it happened, I admitted, but I don't regret knowing the truth of how you feel. Or how I feel." Relief softened his features, though his smile carried a bittersweet edge. "I don't know if we'll ever make sense of this," he said, "but I know I don't want to lose you." In that moment, I realized the story we were writing was not one of perfect beginnings. It was messy, born in shadows, but real nonetheless. And sometimes reality, with all its flaws, is the only thing worth holding on to. As summer waned, the apartment began to feel different. The tension eased, replaced by something quieter, acceptance perhaps, or the tentative first steps of a new chapter. We hadn't declared ourselves a couple, nor had we tried to define what we were. Instead, we allowed time to mend what guilt had broken. Looking back, I knew the path ahead would not be easy. Love born from infidelity carried scars, and ours would be no different. But in Daniel's presence, in the way his laughter filled the rooms, or the way he leaned into me when the nights grew cold, I found a sense of belonging I hadn't known before. The last words he spoke that night stayed with me long after the city had gone quiet. Sometimes the heart takes the wrong road just to find the right person. And though our story was far from finished, I finally believed him. The weeks that followed were neither simple nor seamless. Living with Daniel, after everything that had happened, felt like walking along a shoreline where each wave erased the footprints of a last. Some days, the tide carried us closer together, and other days, it pulled us apart. The apartment itself seemed to carry our unspoken tension, each room echoing with the memory of what we had crossed into. Daniel tried to return to a semblance of normalcy. He cooked, he hummed his familiar tunes, and he even invited a few friends over again, though the brightness in his smile never fully reached his eyes. I, too, attempted to blend the extraordinary back into the ordinary, telling myself that we had time, that rushing into labels would only bruise us further. Yet beneath the surface, questions lingered. Were we building something new, or simply patching holes in the wreckage of what had broken? One evening, I found him sitting on the balcony, knees drawn up, staring out at the city lights. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of rain. Without asking, I sat beside him. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel broke the silence. "Sometimes I wonder if we started everything the wrong way," he murmured. His voice carried no accusation, only the heaviness of reflection. I turned toward him, watching the faint lines of worry etch deeper across his face. "Maybe we did," I admitted, "but wrong beginnings don't always mean wrong endings. What matters is what we choose now." He exhaled slowly, as if weighing my words. "Do you ever regret it?" The question caught me off guard, though it wasn't the first time he had asked something like it. I thought carefully before answering. I regret the hurt it caused. I regret that it wasn't clean or simple. But I don't regret you, Daniel. Not for a moment. For the first time in days, his lips curved into a smile, tentative yet real. He shifted closer, resting his head lightly against my shoulder. The gesture was small, but it carried with it the fragile promise of trust rebuilding itself. Despite that quiet moment, the days ahead still tested us. Aaron's absence hung like a ghost between us, unspoken but unavoidable. Once, Daniel's phone lit up with his name, and though he ignored it, I caught the flicker of pain in his eyes. I realized then that healing wasn't linear. Daniel wasn't just walking away from a relationship, but from years of shared history, from a version of himself he had tried desperately to sustain. I learned to give him space. Some nights he would retreat into silence, and I resisted the urge to fill it with questions. Other nights he would knock on my door, sit on the edge of my bed, and talk about nothing in particular, old memories from childhood, the books he loved but never finished, the dreams he was too afraid to chase. Those moments stitched us together in ways more honest than anything physical could. One Sunday afternoon, as sunlight poured across the living room floor, Daniel turned to me with a steadiness I hadn't seen in him for weeks. "I want to do this, right?" he said. "With you. Not as an escape, not as a rebound, but because I choose you. And I want you to know that." The words lodged deep within me, carving out a place where doubt had lived. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached across the table, threading my fingers through his. "Then let's do it right," I whispered. "No hiding. No lies. Just us." For the first time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt uncertain, yes, but also possible, like a road untraveled, waiting for our footprints. That night, as Daniel and I stood side by side on the balcony again, the city stretched out beneath us like a canvas of light. The air was calm, carrying neither storm nor shadow. He slipped his hand into mine, not furtively, not hesitantly, but with quiet certainty, and in that stillness, I realized that the story we had begun in secrecy was no longer chained to its origins. We had stumbled, we had faltered, but now, at last, we were stepping into something new, something honest, something chosen. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was full, alive, brimming with the unspoken understanding that this time we had a chance to write the story differently,